Welcome to yet another in the series of Perth US Asia Center Foreign Policy Conversations. For those of you who have worked with and followed the center, you know that we are located at the University of Western Australia, one of the elite research universities in Australia that is part of an organization called the Group of Eight. It is somewhat the equivalent of the Ivy League for those watching this in the United States. It is the research-intensive universities in the top 8 nationally and internationally ranked universities in Australia. And we're delighted today to have a conversation with Vicki Thomson, who's the chief executive of the Group of Eight Australia and a wonderful friend of the Perth US Asia Center, and of course of the University of Western Australia as one of the members of the Group of Eight. Vicki is probably well known to many people who are watching this. She has served in her current position with the Group of Eight since January of 2015, a long career with universities. Prior to that, she was with the Australian, excuse me, I didn't know the exact word.
Australian Technology Network.
Thank you. I almost had that. I appreciate that. But a long career in journalism, in politics, covering many of the issues we worked with. Of particular note to us at the Perth US Asia Center, the chairman of our board, former senator and former South Australian Premier John Olsen, is key to our success, and Vicki was key to his success. She served as his chief of staff when he was Premier of South Australia. But very importantly, although Adelaide lays claim to her now, we lay claim to her as a West Australian, and we're delighted to have this conversation. Vicki, thank you for making the time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gordon. I feel like I should be about 105 with that introduction.
I might look 105. That's the problem. Well, hey, look, the university sector has been absolutely integral to our success as an organization because the issues that we work on, be it trade, be it security, be it resources, be it innovation, are all very much the purview of a research university. And yet we, like the university sector, like the Group of Eight that you represent, has been impacted tremendously by the developments over the last year. So why don't we kind of start big picture? COVID-19 has had an impact on every sector of the Australian economy, but a particular impact on higher education. And I was wondering if you might kind of give us an overview from your perspective as chair of the CEO of the Group of Eight.
Thanks, Gordon. Look, COVID has, as you've rightly said, impacted every sector of the economy. And I think that's the really important point here because education and higher education is an absolutely critical part of our national economy. And that is true for universities internationally as well. And so for the Group of Eight universities, maybe if I just provide a little bit of context so that we understand what that economic impact is. Across our 8 universities, we do about 70% of Australian-based university research. And if you look at our system, we've got around 41 universities. So 8 of those universities are doing 70% of that research. And we spend around $6.5 billion every year on research. Now, that is research that creates jobs. It's obviously research which is, saving lives and changing people's lives. And it has an incredible impact into the economy. So when something like COVID-19 comes and hits us all, and we basically, like everybody, went from a sort of a running to a stop, that's going to hit us economically as well. But it's also going to hit, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is the economy, the broader economy, because we are an intrinsic part of that. So when COVID-19 hit us, we, like everyone, we pretty much had to shut up shop. And I know that was slightly different in different states, but for most of us, it meant that we had to pivot really quickly as universities to online delivery. Our research had to sort of pivot really quickly. We could only keep critical labs open, that sort of thing. And so for every business that is true, that happened, but what we weren't able to access really was any external support for our universities. And so that funding that we do for research, which is largely cross-subsidised, and I'm sure we will talk about this by our international students, that has been impacted. It means we can't do the work that we do as universities. And I keep going back to that, we are the engine room of that research enterprise, if you like, and that's really important. And so for us, COVID-19, I think, has been I don't like to use the word that often, but at some point it was almost catastrophic. And we were flying blind a bit as to what does this actually mean. And full credit to not just the Group of 8, but to all of Australia's university system for keeping the lights on the best that they could to teach our students and to undertake that research. I think that is also true internationally, and I'm very well connected with our counterparts in the US through the American Association of Universities, in the UK with the Russell Group. They too have had a really difficult time. But the difference has been they were recipients of support from either their federal or state governments. And so they were able to continue to do a lot of what we have had difficulty doing. And so for us, you know, if I think this time last year, we just did not know what was in front of us. And it was really challenging for us. And now we're in April 2021. It's almost unbelievable that we've got to where we've got to be frank, in terms of being able to pretty much reopen all of our campuses for our domestic students. Life is pretty much back to normal now in terms of having students on campus. It's slightly different in different states of Australia. Victoria is different to Western Australia, for example. But essentially, we've got, you know, businesses up and running, if you like, in terms of our university sector.
But let's talk a little bit more about students, though, because it was one of the vagaries of Australian trade accounting, which may come as a shock to many, that Australia's, if I understand correctly, second largest export is international education. You know, we count services, even though they may be rendered at universities in Australia, as an export of a service. And that was largely the flow of international students coming here to study. That obviously has been interrupted tremendously. Can you give us a sense of that important kind of flow of both revenue and brain power, mind power being cut off, and how that's impacted the sector?
So, you know, I said just then that we spend $6.5 billion on research as a group of universities. We get around about 2.8 billion from the federal government. The gap is largely filled by our international students. And so you don't have to be a mathematician, and I'm not one, but you don't have to be one to work out that there's a significant gap there and a significant cross-subsidisation into our research. And that is fairly unique in the Australian, in the international university system, largely because we don't have access to the sort of philanthropic culture that exists in the US, the large industry base that's in the UK or in the US. So we have relied heavily on our international students to cross-subsidise our research. This is something that our universities have known all along, of course, and it's something that we probably haven't spoken about a lot, but of course it was like we ripped off the Band-Aid because of COVID, and shone a light on that, and that has been the great challenge for us. You're quite right, international education, depending on sort of where it sits, it's second or third, which comes as a surprise to most people as an export sector. And of course, that export sector has all but closed down. So our international borders, as you know, in Australia are still closed, and that has impacted upon our capacity to have our international students on campus. So for the Group of 8, we educate about 1 in 3 international students in Australia at our 8 universities. We have around 63% of all Chinese students who study in Australia are at our Group of 8 universities. Currently, we have around 35,000 Chinese students who are still studying with us but are still in China. And because, of course, when COVID hit us, unlike the US and unlike Europe, we were at the beginning of our academic year and many of our students had gone home for Chinese New Year, and so they weren't able to get back. So we've got this situation now where actually our international students who have already enrolled with us have stuck with us. So that says something, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, about what we're offering. But the challenge is, in terms of recruiting new students, the longer our borders remain closed, the more challenging that is. And one of the things that actually just this week I spoke with my counterparts in the US and the UK and Canada, and of course their borders aren't closed. Australia has handled COVID brilliantly, and we know that because life is pretty much back to normal. But what this has demonstrated to us is that actually COVID is not a barrier to entry for international students. They are still going to the US, they're still going to Canada, they're still going to the UK and Europe. the barrier to entry for us is that our borders are closed.
On our side, well, given that, and given what you said, the first thing, I might be wading into more sensitive territory here, but it seems that the Australian university sector has largely been absent from the public discussion about COVID responses. Given its importance to the economy, is important to our export sector. I'm curious as to why there's that gap between a public response, whether it is JobKeeper or a whole range of other policy measures that don't seem to be taking the university sector into account.
And that's the $1 million question. We haven't been missing in action in certainly advocating for that, but there is a gap, no doubt about that. And again, a conversation I had with my counterparts just this week would demonstrate that in some areas that gap exists in other countries as well. But I guess, and it's a question you'd probably better direct it to our government, because it wasn't for the want of trying that we didn't seek JobKeeper rather, for our universities, and many of our universities have had to lay off staff to be able to manage some of those cost-cutting measures that we had to manage. There is a real problem here, and I think this is a bigger issue, and this is the point I was making about ripping the Band-Aid off. What COVID has done is shone a light on our universities. It's shone a light on our financial, the way we operate in a financial context. It has demonstrated that actually, and this is successive governments, it's not necessarily a this term of government issue, successive governments have reduced funding to universities, particularly in the research space. And at the same time, we've increased the number of international students. Not just as a revenue-raising issue, and that's an important point. We have a great quality offering for our students in the region. But that money has been used to cross-subsidise our research. And I think what this has done, in a positive way, because I'm a cup half full person, because I think you have to be, is it has demonstrated that actually we need a new funding model for universities, that what we have now is not sustainable. The federal government with JobKeeper, it was a fantastic exercise for many other parts of the economy, but they just didn't feel that it would apply to universities because there was a prevailing view that universities have done all right and they can sustain themselves into the long term. And, we would assert that that's not the case. And I think the federal government, if I was playing devil's advocate, would assert that this will make us change our business model. And it will. We have to.
Yeah, well, that's probably something that the broader public or even many of our viewers won't necessarily understand is how much the very important research that you outlined at the beginning is dependent upon our international engagement in the form of international students. And again, that's where it really is hand in glove with the work that we do in terms of our engagement with the region, because Australia does have a very attractive offering in terms of education, but with every student educated comes tourism, comes long-term diplomatic relationship that strengthens the bonds between our countries in the region. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to get back into that. I want to go back to the United States, if I might. You referenced twice, your colleagues and your counterparts in the U.S. I was fortunate on at least two different occasions to travel with you as you led Group of 8 delegations through the United States, and I know how much collaboration and cooperation takes place between not just Australia and the US, but Australia in the EU, Australia and the UK, and then a number of other kind of like-minded and similar universities around the globe. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted. Obviously, we're not in Washington right now, and then just kind of highlight some of the areas where the U.S. and Australia are working together, whether it's research, whether it's innovation, whether it is combating, foreign influence, whether it is cyber. There's the range of areas where the United States is a particularly important partner for us.
And an absolutely critical partner. And actually, that has just been reinforced throughout this COVID period. The positive aspect of COVID has been that we are talking a lot more. So unfortunately, we're not seeing each other face to face, but I'm talking to my counterparts in the US and the UK and other Five Eyes countries, if you like, pretty much every sort of few weeks. The US in particular is very important to Australia and Australia's research enterprise. And so the way we would measure, and I guess, let me just go back, research is a global enterprise. Australia has incredible researchers, but we can't do it on our own. And so as a country, we have to be very externally facing, and you know that better than many others, and many of the people who would be watching this would know that. The way we measure our depth of or our intensity, if you like, of our research with different nations is through our co-publications. And so the EU as a bloc is our largest partner, but the US as a country is our largest partner. And that has been the case for a long time and will continue to be the case. And the other important aspect of our relationship as universities, and particularly the Group of Eight with the US, is they're also, in many instances, our largest funder. And so we get a significant proportion of funding through the US-based NIH, the National Science Foundation, DARPA, their defence agency. We do a lot of research with the US in those areas because we are like-minded, values-aligned countries. And they're two sentences and phrases that are very much part of our rhetoric now. You touched upon the foreign interference space. I think what COVID has done has shone a light, if you like, on our supply chains, on our globalisation, on our partnerships in various regions, and certainly from the Australian government's perspective, in the foreign interference kind of context, there is a real push for us to partner even more with those like-minded, values-aligned networks. And so for us, that is very much the obvious, you know, the Five Eyes network, which is Canada, New Zealand, the UK and the US, but also Japan, Germany, Europe, and member states of the ASEAN region as well. So we're doing a lot of work in that space. But just going back to the US, what we're finding in our discussions with my university counterparts in the US is that we've got a lot that we can both learn from each other, particularly in this new environment of foreign interference. And we are actually right now collaborating on a joint document between the American Association of Universities and the Group of Eight and the Russell Group on a set of principles about engaging with each other in areas of sensitive technologies and sensitive research. And so I think that just highlights to you, we have this already trusted relationship because of the nature of the Australia-US alliance. And so as universities, we are capitalising on that, and we must, because they are our very important partners and will continue to be so.
You know, as it happens, my last foreign trip was in January of 2020 with you in Washington, D.C. And one of my own personal takeaways from that was how much ahead of the game the Group of Eight in particular was, but the university sector was. If I recall correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Group of Eight had produced a kind of a UFITS document looking at foreign interference and transparency, and we're leading the government on these issues rather than kind of following behind them, just because of an understanding of the areas of risk, the areas of exposure. So really, hats off on that effort. It's really impressive. Yeah,
no, that is true. And in fact, in a couple of areas we are, and that's my point, I guess, about learning from each other. We are all facing the same challenges in a sense. And the University Foreign Interference Guidelines, of which I'm a member of the task force, we can never underestimate the value of that process of bringing together in Australia our security agencies and our university sector to develop and co-design these interference guidelines, which are country agnostic, and that's an important point. And I know now Canada are in the process of developing a similar set of guidelines, and certainly the US, as you say, they are in the process of developing a set of guidelines sort of 12 months after we've done it. But that visit that you and I undertook in the US last year was a really important watershed moment in, I think, demonstrating to US government agencies that, we are very serious about this, that we, and as a country and as a group of universities, our location is quite pivotal. Our relationship with China is very important, and our relationship with the US is really important. And we have to manage that. And there's a lot that you can learn from us about how we manage that relationship. And I think for me, that was the big takeout.
Look, we've talked a lot about the Five Eyes in the US in particular. I realize that many of these similar issues are being discussed with Europe. You were out here in Perth just a couple of weeks ago, not wearing your Group of Eight hat, but I think you're a member of the board of the European Australia Business Council, and you kindly hosted a dinner with Matthias Cormann, former senator from South Australia, who's now heading off to be the Secretary General of the OECD. Anything unique about the relationship with Europe? Is it pretty synergistic with what you described with the relationship with the United States?
Look, it is. And as I said, in terms of our research connections, that, we're building from a very strong foundation of, a strong research relationship with them. In the foreign interference space, what is really interesting, just before we were in Washington last year, I was in Europe and meeting with my European counterparts. This is the Global Research Intensive Universities Network. And we also went up to Brussels and met with the EU and met with the EU research commissioners. At that time, and I had been talking a lot to my counterparts and to government agencies in the UK and Europe about the challenges that we were facing in terms of foreign interference. And it seemed to be, we're interested and obviously alert, but we're not alarmed, if I can use that old cliche. That has completely shifted in the last 12 months. And so whereas the US and Australia, I think, were kind of working in lockstep on that, and I'm talking at the university level, obviously, it wasn't such the case with the European universities. My conversation with them just this week actually was like, those guidelines that you developed, we need to talk to you about them. So I think it's another case where we have been ahead of the game. What is really important to us in the European context is they have the Horizon Europe. I think up until just 2 weeks ago, it was the world's largest collaborative research fund. But I think President Biden has just in the last couple of weeks announced to fund the EU one is 100 billion euro. I think this one is actually more. So it's going to be even larger. But for Australia, what's important about that fund is that we get a seat at the table and we have access to that fund. And that really, we will be looking to people like Matthias Cormann and others to really be the kind of, proponent of getting Australia a seat at the table. That's not something the Group of Eight can do. It's something that the federal government needs to be able to do.
So most of those conversations that you've just been discussing have to do with a particular country, which is a particular challenge for Australia and for the Group of Eight and the university sector more broadly. China is the source of some of our best and brightest students that are here, a very significant portion of them, and then it has revenue implications, also very important research partners. And at the same time, changing politics of China has meant that there is growing concern. In Australia now, my guess is the public view has probably shifted quite dramatically over the last 12 months as we've been on the receiving end of a rather punitive set of trade actions on China's part. So it's kind of a one-sided trade war where we, because of our temerity in suggesting that there should be a transparent investigation of the origins of COVID, have kind of been hit on a political level. That has impacted political views, has impacted public views, but it also kind of highlights the particular tensions or framing of the challenges that the university sector has. So I know that's a lot to pack in, but how do you overlay those growing tensions, concerns, and worries about China with the importance of the collaboration, the research, and the students that we've just discussed?
Look, it is a conundrum, and it is a very challenging conundrum. So I very deliberately pointed out that our UFIT guidelines are country agnostic, and we've had a raft of legislative regimes or processes put in which are country agnostic. But it's kind of the elephant in the room that we are talking about a particular country, and that is China. I think the thing that I take some comfort in is that throughout all of that, sort of the complexity that you just outlined very well, what is sustaining our relationship are our education and research ties. And at that people-to-people kind of level, that is very strong. So I know, for example, when I'm talking to my counterparts in China, when I'm engaging with the Chinese embassy, and when we're engaging with those students and our universities are engaging with our students who are currently offshore but enrolled with us, there's a very deep affection for Australia and a very strong view that we must maintain the research ties that we've got and the education links. And you raised this earlier. I mean, you cannot underestimate the soft diplomacy value of the relationship we have with China. And let's remember, as universities, we've had that relationship for over 50 years. This is not a new phenomena. And we've withstood a lot of challenges within that relationship, but this would be our most challenging time. There's no doubt about that. I spent some time on the Australia-China Council when it was in existence and was appointed by our former Foreign Affairs Minister, Julie Bishop, to that. And you could start to see some of the challenges that we are now facing at that time in terms of China's China's kind of resurgence, or at least its maturity, or it's mature, but it's growing kind of voice, and how we would respond to that. And I think COVID has actually again kind of condensed everything into this period of time. And we have been lucky as universities and as a sector that the sanctions that have been imposed on, for example, the wine industry and others have not been imposed upon us. But we do watch that really carefully, because the only people that are impacted are students who are actually just wanting to get a really good education. And most of them, I think it's around 86% of our Chinese students, go back, assuming they could have been here, they go back to China and they take with them, a fantastic experience here in Australia, a brilliant education or research partnership or whatever it is they've done here. And they're part of our soft diplomacy into China. And so government understands that, and they do understand that. But overlaying all of that is this issue of foreign interference. And, we are told by our security agencies that it is at an unprecedented level. We have to believe our security agencies. We have to take that seriously. And so I think it's around putting tall fences around small places and protecting the research that we have to, which we all will do, whether you're in China or if you're in Australia or if you're in the US, but not sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and shutting the door completely. And so for our universities, it's a very challenging path for us to walk that line, I have to tell you.
Well, I do like the concept of tall fences around small places. That is something I think most people could understand. Yeah. Also, I think something you said that I think is really important to understand is that naturally, we in Australia, whether you're a barley farmer or a wine grower, are going to focus on the economic impact to us of Chinese actions. But we forget they also have tremendous impacts on China, on the Chinese people. They're I understand, having had this early spring, having to close down coal-fired power plants and have blackouts in China for want of Australian coal. And obviously there are probably a lot of Chinese that want West Australian crayfish or wine or barley.
I want West Australian crayfish.
We're awash of it. Come home. We've got you covered in that front. But hey, look, let's move into this broader thing, which I think you've identified very well, and that is the Australian offering in the higher education sector. You mentioned that we obviously have more than a 50-year experience with one country, but more broadly, we have evolved a business model where for countries globally, but particularly within our region, the Indo-Pacific, there's tremendous interest in a Australian university experience. I'm curious as to how you see that developing post-COVID, and in particular, if I can vent a little bit here, my view is that we have this narrow window of opportunity where we can steal a march on our longtime friends and allies, the United States or the UK or Europe more broadly. And that coming out of COVID, we have a reputation as being clean and well-governed and healthy and safe in that regard. And if you're a mother sending off your only child from China, or sending off your students from Korea or Japan or Taiwan or Malaysia or India or Indonesia, Australia now seems to me to be far more attractive than maybe the United States might be, or the UK might be, or Italy might be, and France might be in that regard. And yet the challenge is, how do we then market that when the message that we've been saying is that we're closed, right? The borders are closed. And I know you've spoken on this, I know you've written on this, but it seems to me to be fundamentally at odds with what should be a historic period of relative advantage for us, attractive for us as a study destination, a tourism destination, an investment destination, and all three of those go hand in hand.
And my concern is that window of opportunity is just about closed, and that comes from the discussions that I have with counterparts where, I asked the question actually just recently, are you seeing an uptick in numbers from the region? And particularly in the UK, they are. And they are attributing that to the fact that our borders are closed, and they're being very aggressive in their marketing and their positioning in terms of students. And so this is the conundrum. Whilst our borders remain closed, and there is some messaging which has been very concerning for us, that not only are our borders physically closed, but that we are not open for business, if you like, in terms of wanting to bring in international students. And that is a great shame for both the region and for Australia, and not just in the economic sense. And of course that's important. But it's that, and I'm repeating myself, but it's that soft diplomacy, and that's that kind of porosity of movement, if you like. And so we've really got to get our skates on if we want to ensure that the window hasn't shut and we've lost that opportunity. Now, the federal government does understand that. I'm confident of that. And we have, as a group of universities, always said that whilst the health advice is such that the borders remain closed, we understand that China's borders are closed to international students. So, it's they're doing the same thing at the moment. And in fact, I was talking to a colleague in Japan, and we were having this exact conversation. But there has to be at least a plan for reopening. And there has to be some messaging into the region that we are open for business, even if our borders are closed. And we are doing that institutionally, and we're working really hard with our students and our research partners. But the question is, how long can we sustain that? How long do we remain attractive? So if you think about, why do students come to Australia? We have highly ranked universities. We have a fantastic education system. We're all the things that you said. We're safe. We're primarily in the same time zone, bar a couple of hours here and there. It's easy for families to come to us. So all of those things. But we haven't necessarily been competitive on price, and our borders are now closed. So if you take away those aspects, you'd have to be wondering, if you are the parent sending their only child to Australia, it costs quite a lot of money, and there are not strong signals from government that my child will be wanted and will be okay. So, there's messaging back in China about safety issues. We know that is not true, but that's the messaging that's going back. They will look elsewhere, and they will look to Canada, and they will look to the US. And that's I think, the challenge for us. And we're seeing that particularly in the Indian student market. We're seeing those enrolment numbers, or at least application numbers, reduce, and that's a concern for us. And as I said, sort of the flip side of that is our Chinese students are sticking with us, but there's a whole region out there, and that's the ASEAN region, that we need to be engaging with far more proactively in terms of students and research.
Full disclosure, aside from just the general enjoyment I have in having conversations with you, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this interview was because that message is so integral to our own message as an institution. The Perth US Asia Centre is dedicated to improving and strengthening Australia's understanding of and ties with our partners in the Indo-Pacific. And it's really hard to do that when we can't engage with them. And while we have been successful, like the university success sector, in shifting much of our business model online and virtual, that only goes so far, right? It's really easy to maintain existing relationships virtually. It's much more difficult to build new ones. And so reestablishing connectivity is core to what we're doing. Whether it's conferences and seminars or workshops, or whether it's research projects. And so to be able to amplify your voice, which has been so clear on this issue, and through you, the university sector, I think is important to begin to impact the private sector, the broader civil society here, and how governments, both national and state, kind of view this window of opportunity for us. Because in the end, it is a window where if we take advantage of it, and even if we can't open the borders today, we send out the messaging
absolutely
that we're open, that we
absolutely
want you, we need you, and by the way, we have the best quality of life on the planet. Because I think people recognize that we have the best quality of life on the planet, but they also recognize that they can't get here, which is probably a conflicting message at the least, right?
And nothing can replace that face-to-face interaction. Our students, I'll just put research to one side for the moment, but our students are coming to Australia because they want an international experience. The fact that they have stuck with us over this last 12 months is quite remarkable. And it tells me that, they value the education component of it. The question is how longer will they stay with us? And then to your point, how do you develop those new relationships and get new students in? Yeah. And when there's no signal, and there is no signal from government around borders opening, and I think we are stuck in this really difficult position at the moment where the federal government is blaming the state governments and the state governments are blaming the federal governments. Australia has this wonderful federated system, which, when it works really well, but when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And so as universities, we're really struggling because we have very well developed plans. We have developed a very and we've had it signed off by various chief medical officers around a secure corridor. But at the moment, the priority is on returning Australians. And, we understand that. We're not critical of the government for that. But we don't think it's beyond our capacity to say, OK, and here's the plan for the return of students, whether it be semester 2 or, semester 3. At this stage, I did say I was a cup half full person. But seriously, Gordon, at this stage, I don't see a return in bulk numbers until 2022.
Well, this is an area where we, as part of and partners with the university sector, will join you in seeking, in recommending, and pushing for that demand signal to be coming from us federally and from the state level. I would note that we are pleased to announce, and it'll be in our next newsletter when this video comes out as well, that Brad Haynes, the former vice president for government affairs of Rio Tinto, who had a wonderful, long storied career at DFAT before working for both Chevron and Rio, has come on board as a non-resident fellow with the Perth US Asia Center. And one of the issues that he's expressed deep interest in is in understanding what our corporate sector, our resource sector in particular, have done to keep the engine of Australia up and running. Because I just to give you a little bit of an anecdote, one of the most striking experiences I had early on in my tenure here was visiting, within the space of a month, the International Space Station Control Center in Houston, Texas, and then the Rio Tinto Remote Operations Center right outside the Perth Airport. Yeah, and the Rio Center is by orders of magnitude more high tech, more complex. Because if you're operating remote mines up in the remote areas of the Pilbara here, you might as well be on the moon. And all of a sudden, during the course of this pandemic, our resource companies across the board had to figure out how to get people in, how to protect people, how to put in protocols for daily moving thousands of people through the process. There's no reason in the world why those learned lessons and those technologies and those policies and procedures couldn't be applied to the university sector. And again, I know the university sector themselves have already developed policies and procedures to be able to bring in students safely and effectively. What we're lacking is the leadership and the demand.
The will. We're ready to go. And I think, we've had some exemptions for medical students who have been in their sort of third, fourth, final years to come in. But I'm talking about maybe all up, I think around 800 students.
Wow.
So, when you think that we've still got 30,000 offshore, and that doesn't sort of take into account new students. And a really interesting point you raise with Rio and their technology. There's also an aspect here about our own skills base. So I mentioned that I think it's around 85-86% of our students go back home, but the 15% who don't actually form the bedrock of our skills. And there is a broader discussion here that, we're starting to have, and I've certainly just recently put in a submission to a federal government inquiry around migration and skills. If we want to maintain that's important, but grow our skills base, it will rely on our international students and our PhD students and our master's students who are studying with us, who then choose to stay and put down roots in this wonderful country. And so there is a connection between what industry will be needing, and we are certainly talking to industry, and what universities are wanting to deliver but just can't at the moment.
Oh, fantastic. Well, look, I could carry on this conversation for a long time, but I think I've already gone over a lot of time. I want to wrap up with one kind of final question, which really builds on the conversation thus far. And that is helping understand what we lose if we don't grab this window of opportunity. Because whether it was the original Colombo plan and all those students from our region who came here and are now back in leadership positions all throughout our region, people who understand Australia, who are friends with Australia, to the reverse Colombo plan that former Foreign Minister Julie Bishop championed, that are taking Australian students, getting them into the region, that cross exchange with our neighborhood, with our region, with the Indo-Pacific seems to me personally and to the center institutionally to be essential to the Australian future. Would you kind of just, big picture from the university sector, talk about the importance of connectivity, the importance to the country, to the economy, to us as a people of that sector, that type of connectivity?
Look, Australia has been built on its relationship with the region. That is what makes us the wonderful multicultural country that we are. And we are more than just our beautiful beaches and our beautiful scenery, and we are that. But we have a capacity to be a high-tech, advanced technology country, but we can't do that on our own. As good as we like to think we are, if you think of all of the trailblazers in our history, it has been through research partnerships, innovation, technology, which has come in, and we've collaborated and we've worked really well together. At the moment, programs like the New Colombo Plan are at a standstill because we can't send people into the region. And the whole point of a program like that was to ensure that we don't just take international students to Australia, we actually put our students into the region and they develop an understanding of what is happening. And you have this wonderful sort of pollination, if you like, of research and education. There is no greater gift that we can give our future generations than an education, and that's not an education which is closed, it's an education of our region. And at the moment, we are trying to do that, and we're doing that through a whole lot of online delivery, both reaching out, but none of that will take the place of face-to-face. And so whilst we all understand the position that we're all in, it is time for a plan. It is time for us to get back on the bike, if you like, and get our students out into the regions in a safe way. And I think there's a strong desire to do that. Because if we don't, there is the economic impact. And, you know, we've all done studies, and I can tell you that every international student generates $1 million over their period into their local economies. We know that it's the largest export sector. But the most important thing in the geopolitical context, in my mind, is that if we are all educated and understand how we all act and interact, we develop and build a resilience and a tolerance to that and an understanding to that. I guess tolerance may be not the correct word, but if you understand what I'm saying, we understand each other, we can then start to have sensible discussions rather than some of the discussions we have now where we just shut the gate because we're fearful of the unknown. And it is really our next generation of researchers and students that we really need to kind of lead that charge.
Well, we are in furious agreement. The challenges that we face as a nation and the opportunities that we face as a nation are not ones that can be handled by ourselves. They require partnerships. They require collaboration with other countries in the region. And the education sector is really a key foundation for that. Thank you so much, Vicki. It's an absolute delight to have this conversation.
Thank you, Gord.
We've got a growing body of people in the policy community, not just here in Australia, but throughout the region that will be interested in your views, and we appreciate you making the time to share them. Thanks.
Great to be with you. Thank you.